Okay, we're good to go. Hello, everyone, and welcome to day two of our CyberCatch AI security webinar. We had a good time on the first day. Definitely did have a good time on the first day, and we are here to continue the conversation of this three-part webinar. Today, we'll be focusing on how AI is contributing to supply chain risks. Last time we discussed vibe coding and exactly what vibe coding is and how we can manage the issues around it. Today, we will discuss how AI contributes to supply chain risks and the expanded attack surface because of AI. And what exactly will we be unpacking today? So, what are supply chain risks? What result does AI have in terms of our supply chain and the risk around it, the expanded attack surface? How can we map and assess our exposure to these risks? And then maybe we'll get some time to talk about the different frameworks for third-party risk management, which would cover AI. So to have this conversation, like last week, I am joined by two very well experienced professionals, Emmanuel and Helen. Do you want to introduce yourself, guys?
Yeah, happy to go. Emmanuel here. I promise I do not look like this every time. I had a clipper issue and had to shave all my beard. But jokes aside, I am a manager in PwC UK. I sit really at the intersection of audit, cybersecurity, and software development. So I just sit at that layer. And in my spare time, I manage a blog where I just document my thoughts around AI audit risk. The name of the blog is emmanuelagidi.com. Yeah, happy to be here.
Thank you, Emmanuel. Thank you very much for joining, Helen.
Yeah, I promise this is the way I used to look. Most times, especially when I work from home. So if you see me outside, you might see someone with a longer hair, but this is me real, echoing what Emmanuel just said now. My name is Helen Oluyemi, Information Security Manager at Pollinate. Pollinate is a fintech, one of the largest fintech company in London as well. And day to day, mostly I manage security operations, incident management, vulnerability management, and sometimes I get involved in third-party risk management. And recently, in the last couple of months, like say over 8 months ago now, since November last year, I've been keen to just explore AI and cybersecurity more. And I've had around three talks now, physical talks around best practices when you adopt AI in your organization. And so I'm happy to be here this afternoon to discuss third-party risk assessment when you integrate AI in your platform. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. Thank you, Emmanuel. Yes, it's afternoon, it's morning for some people, to be fair. And Helen, Helen and Emmanuel, I know definitely you have several years of experience, up to 10 each, I think, which is considerable in the security in the technology industry. Helen also is being humble because I know you appeared in the top 100 women in cyber at some point, was it last year? And Emmanuel and I were colleagues in KPMG before now. So it's going to be a very good conversation for today. But before we dive in, my name is Kachi. Yes, again, I am the host of the CyberCatch podcast and the leader cybercatch.com. I'm the one that we've been having this conversation since last week. So I'll still be here. But before we start the discussion, in quotes, a little bit about cybercatch.com. We are an education platform, a cybersecurity education platform specifically, and we help modern teams build their security programs by training staff and executive training, different cybersecurity readiness, bridge simulations, tabletop exercises, even for AI. And we host the Cybercash podcast. So you can follow us on LinkedIn via the QR code. You can also follow us on Spotify and YouTube to continue the conversations. So, what exactly is the supply chain? We've said a few times that today we want to talk about how the AI how AI, integrating AI into your tech platform affects your supply chain or affects your supply chain. So to make sure that we are all on the same page, let's take a few discussions, a few definitions. So first, the supply chain risks, essentially the potential for security threats or disruptions that arise from having third-party vendors or software providers or service partners. Now, if you are a business, you probably have people that help you do things. So you have someone that provides maybe your access management platform or whatever. You give people access to your environment, and those are third parties. Now, all these third parties in your environment bring some threat or some risks into your organization, and it's something that you want to keep an eye on. And that's essentially what we refer to as supply chain risks. Now, with the commonness of AI everywhere and people adding AI to their tech stack, is significantly expanding each organization's attack surface and sometimes introducing even new supply chain risks. So this is what we want to take some time to discuss today. And I will give the microphone back to our panelists, Emmanuel and Helen, in whatever order. I know they have some opening statements. So Helen, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. Supply chain risk, AI, third-party risk management. And I, and I was just trying to prepare for this webinar this afternoon, and there was this report released by Gartner in 2024 that says over 52% of organizations uses generative AI tools, right? And because of that, they've kind of experienced an unintended data exposure via third-party integrations, and which is often not approved by IT network. So an example would be, for instance, when we acquire a vendor, for instance, and we've done like our third-party risk assessment or vendor risk assessment with our vendor. When we acquired them, say like 5 years ago, 4 years ago, they were not using AI in their platform. And as a result of that, the kind of third-party risk assessment we do for them is different from when they now have AI integrated into their platform. And it could also be that sometimes people having like a browser extension on their browser. So if an organization approves the use of ChatGPT or Microsoft Copilot or any of the AI tools to help with text creation, email generation, some employees might as well just like taking some browser extension into their platform, and it's totally out of our sight. And so what we've done in terms of the risk assessment would be on the approved AI tools. However, we kind of have like an oversight, or within like, let me call it like a shadow IT of the browser that they've the extension they've added into their browser. And which means that there are a lot of risk out there, even within the organization that we are not aware of, or that you might not be aware of as a risk manager or as an IT manager in your organization. And I think this is part of what we would like to address today in this webinar. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Helen. Looking forward to your thoughts definitely throughout today. Emmanuel, you want to go?
Yes. When I think of this topic, right, there are three things that come to mind for me. I think one is that definition of third party in itself. And where, in my experience, just encountering a couple of organizations, is where you have a fourth party, like party of a party. You think about like where you get a SOC report, for instance, for those of us that are in the security world, where you get a SOC report, you have an area called like carved out or sub-service organization. It's when we talk about AI, when I go and meet some clients and we talk about AI, they're quick to say, oh, we don't have generative AI, we've not developed any solution yet. And so it's like, I'm not impacted. But the question is, what about the vendor of your vendor, if you get what I mean, right? So they may be using. So a typical one, for example, is a couple of organizations that are hosted on maybe on Microsoft, for instance. So you have your data in Microsoft data center, cloud, and all of those stuff, right? What is Microsoft doing? Like, are you like keeping in top of that? And maybe you have one fancy startup that is working for you, and they themselves are not developing models, so you feel comfortable they are not developing models, but they may be relying on something. So just that view is one of the things that's comes to mind for me. I think the other thing as well from a audit lens, just speaking there, is the risk that AI just poses to us, right? From an audit perspective, we are moving not necessarily away, but moving from just checking things like access management, who has access to what, who can change what when you're doing like vendors, but we're also checking what is the model doing, like what is the decision, is it explainable, like what is it doing, and how is that impacting your business? That is one thing. And then the third thing that comes to my mind when I think about this topic strongly is actually the definition of AI. All right. I think a lot of, and rightly so, right? A lot of these conversations are driven by LLM, generative AI. But if we just step back as well in the whole big AI chain, there's also machine learning. There are some things that we've come to take as for granted, right? Things like OCR, where it's system making decision autonomously, and there's risks there. So one that I've seen, for instance, is where OCR is reading invoices, scanned invoices, and it has to make decision, right, on a particular number. So someone has written a number like 9.0, for instance. If that OCR is missing the points, it becomes 90. In a financial statement, that becomes a big number, right? It changes the number from like 90 pounds to maybe 900 pounds, or from 9 pounds to 90 pounds, and that cascades. So it's just, so I think it's, when I just think about AI, it's more generative AI is good, hallucination, risk, and all of those things are good, but also we should not be forgetting our traditional AI stuff like machine learning and the risk that it poses. And all of those are things that I'm looking to get into today as well.
Okay, thank you very much, Emmanuel. When you mentioned 9.0 and 90, my mind went to something that small can affect materiality, you get. So when you're discussing audit, so that's definitely relevant. I want to touch on it as we go on. So for the people who have listening to us live, we just have some poll to like a very quick poll, sort of questions and quotes that you can take some time to answer so that we get exactly what you want to know through this session. I will let the polls out right now, and you can answer. If you have joined us on the webinar, you should be able to see it if you join us actually on Zoom. So I'll just do that and we can continue. This is really, the first one is essentially just about our day one, but let's go on with the webinar itself. So thank you, Helen and Emmanuel. I will just show some quick stats before we then go into the specific question. And also to our listeners, if you have questions for Emmanuel, if you have questions for me, if you have questions for Helen, you can drop it in the chat. If you've joined us on Zoom, there's a Q&A tab. If you are joining us on YouTube or LinkedIn, if you write a question in the chat, we should be able to see it, or I should be able to see it, and I can ask that. So please ask your questions, and we'll continue. But just looking at some of the news headlines here, which is what we're trying to show, you can see, according to the Cyber Magazine, which is fairly popular, a prediction about how much software supply chain attacks are going to cost by 2025, which we are in, around 60 billion USD. So there are many organizations that make this kind of predictions based on the data they have. But considering that AI, which people are rampantly adopting, is going to even add to this, then this figure may be attained or even exceeded, essentially. But you can also see the Lehigh University there at the top right, discussing some of the top concerns that supply chain managers have. Generative AI being one of them. ChatGPT, very common in the environment. How do you manage the risk around them? And then security scorecard. Security scorecard is one of it's a unicorn, probably the biggest ratings organizations you can find out there, and is linking just over 40% of breaches impacting fintech companies now, Helen, to third-party vendors. So, Helen, this is something that you may be interested in. Fintech companies, most of their breaches happen via the supply chain. So, it's very important for us to be having this conversation because supply chain attacks are, according to Security Scorecard, some of the most common sources of breaches for different organizations. Okay, I just wanted us to see this, and I will change the poll that is open. But let's continue. So, Helen, maybe I will start with you. We have some questions that we want to discuss, so let's get the conversation kicking. Helen, you're information security manager. You're engaged with security operations. You talk about threat and vulnerability management. So all of that comes under your purview, and also supply chain risks. So you have vendors, and this is your question, Helen. With the commonness or how common the AI tools have become, have you had to tweak or change your approach to perimeter defense or even your internal security controls? Have you had to do that?
Yeah, I say yes, and it's gradually because a room is not built in a day. We are not there yet. There is always room for improvement in everything that we do. And I mean, in security before now, we always talk about defense in depth, have first layer, second layer, third layer. And from a perimeter defensive approach, we mostly focus on how do we secure like network hedge, like hedge our network hedge, and also enforcing access controls around our system, right? And I mean, just like what Emmanuel said earlier, talking about who, I mean, audits is beyond users approval, access control, and the likes, and we've kind of see this from a different lens in terms of perimeter defense and internal controls that we have around us, because most of the tools we use now, Teams, for instance, I'm sure every organization or most organization has Office 365, like you adopt Microsoft, and Copilot is part of it's now embedded into your Office 365 account, right? And even for companies that uses them CRM. I mean, in fact, all vendors claim that they have AI functionality in their tools, right? And whether this AI functionality is built in-house by their developers or integrated through a different AI model, or they are calling an external AI model, we don't know. But everyone claims to have AI built into their platform, and that's like selling points for everyone now. And with this, create different new risk entirely in the security operations domain or vulnerability management domain, personally for me. And one key thing that I know that everyone here would mention, which Emmanuel might also mention, would be around data exposure, right? How are these AI modeling? I mean, AI models, how do they kind of assess and retain our data? Because why we acquired them before, yes, it's still the reason why we acquired them, but what are they using our data for? I mean, where are the data being stored? And I think Emmanuel also mentioned about third party, fourth party, fifth party. And just like I said, you might be using an AI model that belongs to another AI model, and we don't even have like lenses. We can't even see this in full lens. And so our approach to security perimeter defense or internal controls has really shifted. And I think one key thing that, especially people that uses cloud, we've been talking about applying zero trust principle, to your environment, deny by default. And so in this case, zero trust principle is not just applied to your cloud environment alone, and it's not just related to your users alone. We're also saying, are there any AI agents or AI models or browser extension used in your organization? Then we have to apply zero trust principle to all these it's beyond your user, it's beyond your network perimeter, it's beyond your cloud environments. It's now extends to AI agents or AI models that you use. Either you build it in-house or it's an open source, or or through your vendors. You have to apply zero trust principle to all this. And another thing would be, which is like one key thing that everyone is afraid when it comes to AI model, it's data exposure. Like, how do you prevent data loss prevention or data leakage in your organization? And which means that so an example would be, let me give you an example. You allow ChatGPT in your organization, either premium version or, in fact, I used to tell people or my manager, even if we say we don't want people to use ChatGPT and you kind of block ChatGPT app on people's laptop, I mean, I can always use my phone to quickly type in some messages and, just to see how I can use that to respond to emails, and or if I need to query data or I need to do something that would help me improve or like make me efficient, I can always, do that on my personal laptop. And it's just takes me typing, replicating what I have here to my laptop. Although if we don't allow ChatGPT or other AI models in our organization, I can't easily upload a document. But it's easier for me to type whatever is in the document if I'm lazy to that. So which means we can't really stop users from using AI models. So how do we ensure that our DLP policy monitors all AI inputs and outputs in the organization? It's one thing that we need to look at. It's beyond DLP policy on your Office 365 account alone, that is an one key model that the shift focus when it comes to perimeter defense and internal controls. And another one
Okay.
would be some so for an example would be for our SDLC, software development lifecycle in our organization, for instance, we are already adopting GitHub Copilot, right? And now one thing you can do as an organization is when you want to acquire any of these AI models, you need to ask the vendor to disclose how their AI models have been trained, what data are they using to train this model, and whether the models kind of fine-tuned on in terms of your inputs or your outputs. So you need to be clear on how your data is being trained, where the data is being stored in your organization or in the or how they store the data. And if they use your own data to also train other models, you need to understand that. I'm not saying if they say they use your data to train other models, then you say, okay, you are not doing. It's a risk-based decision that it's not a yes or no answer. There are always like gray areas. It depends on how your risk appetite is, or how important the AI model is to your organization at the point of evaluating the risk. So it's just beyond. So let me kind of summarize what I've said. Defense in depth is beyond just looking at zero trust around your users. You have to look at zero trust around your AI models. And then DLP has to extend, and you have to monitor all AI inputs and outputs in your organization, and also ask your vendor, understand how your data is being used. What kind of, how often did they even refresh their model? Those kind of things are what we think about. And I'm
Okay.
open with that things, yeah. Thank
That's interesting because there's already a question for you from LinkedIn about zero trust, but I'll bring that. Someone's asking about how they can introduce zero trust to AI. We'll talk about that later. But yes, definitely good point, zero trust, DLP, and asking about what the data they collect is actually to be used for, because I know I've done that about one platform that we're trying to onboard. So that is definitely very good. Emmanuel, let me get to you. Helen has said a few things about change or shift. So sticking to changes or shifts, let's ask you about audit. Um, Audits, which you are very well versed in, how should they change? How would you say, how are they even currently changing as it is to better address the specific risks that AI tools will have, like lack of transparency or bias in the third-party tools?
Yeah, that's an interesting one because even like the audit profession in general is still thinking through how they get through this, right? I think first off, like the concept of continuous assurance becomes really important now. So that's idea of doing audits like yearly, annually, I think we have to start changing that mindset because these models they change very fast, right? Like whatever you certified 2 weeks ago, OpenAI probably released something else, a new model that has now changed. And that is important. Important, especially because of the concept, because of like model drift, right? Model drift being a model is one way, and then maybe because it's ingesting data, it starts to change its output, or the rules are changing its output. So continuous assurance becomes important at the moment. Um, Things around monitoring APIs also become important at the moment as well. So not just checking access management or change management, like who has approved and who has changed stuff. But in this era of agentic AIs where the AI can make decisions themselves, like so there's that chain of thoughts. And so even as an audit profession, we're thinking through how do we audit like chain of thoughts, not just auditing the outputs. That behavior is also important to audit as well. So a couple of things changing. And from like a framework perspective, frameworks that we're thinking at the moment, there's the ISO 42001, which is good. It's a good framework to use at the moment. There's also the NIST risk management framework, which is also a good one to use. I'll pause there for reflections.
Okay, so Emmanuel, let me stay with you because you mentioned continuous assessment or assurance. So auditing can be hectic.
Yeah.
And this doesn't have to have a right or wrong answer. Would it be realistic to want to do audits in less than 1 year cycles or 6 month cycles? So now, because you just said the AI platforms probably there are new models or there are changes to algorithm within months or weeks. Would it be realistic for audit to follow that?
So I think there are two ways to look at this, right? There's the internal audit and external audit. So an external audit would come into your environment, audit, and maybe go away. But then we have the internal audit functions. I think it is from a monitoring perspective, we need tools. So definitely AI, definitely automation that flag when things have changed. So i.e., can we set up tools, can we set up rules that will track when a model has changed? So the developer that wrote the code was using maybe GPT 4.5. He changed that model to GPT 5 or GPT 5 when they released it. That should trigger some form of review. And so audit no longer being some detective thing that happens later in the year. They are with automation and stuff, with automation and even with the use of AI, you can get to real-time information as well that can help you like do this continuous assurance, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
One example that comes to mind, if you think about the Zoom issue of like 2023, where updated their they updated their terms and conditions to just allow training of data. So they're going to train their own AI systems, and clients were not involved. If you just imagine having an API that monitors terms of service of your vendors. So if there's any change like that, you get that, and you can also update, maybe trigger a conversation with them. And just speaking broadly to this topic of third party and vendors as well, so that idea of only asking vendors questions when we are trying to onboard them, we have to now change that as well, because we have to recognize that our vendors are changing their approach frequently. They're changing their modus operandi. How do we engage them? Maybe have more frequent conversations with them. It's something that we're thinking about.
Okay, that's very realistic. I actually like this Zoom example because I had not thought about that. So it's a good way to look at it. So if you monitor and there's some change that may involve your data, then it can, oh, we are monitoring, this has happened, this has changed. Do you want to have a conversation around it? That's very good, actually. So Helen, and maybe this next question will be for the two of you. So if you are looking at an AI tool, Helen, I'll ask you first. So you're looking at an AI tool or an AI vendor. Are there specific red flags or specific AI-related vulnerabilities that you look for or to flag during your reviews?
Mm. Am I
So,
audible?
Helen, Emmanuel, yep.
Yeah, yeah, I think lots of red flags actually. And I think for me, an example would be, for instance, when we're trying to adopt GitHub Copilot in our organization to help our dev team, like integrating it into our ECS life cycle. And one thing that has always been like a concern for me is how do they handle our data? And I'm always shouting data handling, data handling. I know that even sometimes, I mean, for instance, if you use GitHub, even without the co-pilot in the organization, you of course save your source code and the likes on their platform, right? But it's
Mhm.
still important to understand how your data is being handled. And one thing I mean, there are many things I would ask them, right? And before that, I think I will talk about, um, especially from the healthiest life cycle perspective. One thing that I would say would be, um, how often do they train their model? And I'm saying this because of vulnerabilities in code. So for instance, my model is trained on a particular um, version of a library. Say, let's think of an example. Yeah, a common example here would be, oh, that's kind of skipped my mind that we talk
Right.
about every now and then. And maybe a version 3.2 of a particular library, and everything is fine with that version. And 6 months after that particular version of the library got exposed, there's a vulnerability around it. And if your AI vendor does not bother, they didn't bother to even, I mean, recheck or retrain the model and even see that, are we calling out an outdated library, for instance, or do we need to change the library to a new version? That means an organization relying on that particular model would be calling in or would automatically inject vulnerabilities into their code, right? That's an example. And one thing I would look out for is how transparent are they about this model? Like, how often do you train your model? How transparent are they? I mean, and if I ask them, how often do you train your model? If I ask them about what kind of model do you use, are they able to explain it? Is it like an open source or a closed, or you develop the model in-house, And once they're able to kind of answer that, then I will also look at are there any other plugins or integration that you have in your models? I mean, so still going back to the fourth party, fifth party, sixth party that Emmanuel mentioned about. So for instance, an AI model being built might be relying on a plugin or integration from third party that I might not be aware of, because I'm only dealing with GitHub Copilot, but I don't know if they have like a third party integration or fourth party integration that they have used to build their model. I need to also kind of understand. I need to understand the transparency around that. And so, for instance, if the model also, so if I'm using GitHub Copilot in my organization today, and there is an error when it comes to the output generation, who takes accountability for that? Is it me or is it the vendor? We need to kind of define what a shared responsibility looks like in an organization. And if my data is exposed today because I'm using your model, I know it's going to affect my organization reputation, but at the same time, when it comes to the financial implications, who would be responsible? Would they be liable to that? Or we just need to kind of understand this shared model responsibility. Another thing would be compliance and governance. I'm sure that they will say, oh, are they aligned with NIST framework, the NIST AI framework ISO 2001? We need to also understand that. If they say yes, I believe that an external auditor has done it's our job to say this organization are well aligned with this particular compliances and governance. And I think, yeah. And one thing I would also look out for would be the ability to say, we fine tune the kind of inputs our developer could, use when they're using like GitHub Copilot. For instance, I know that GitHub Copilot has that. We could say we don't want them to be able to pull in a particular source code, like define the key string. If a source code or if the input text contains these keywords, that should automatically disabled, and that way we're able to kind of put security guardrails in place because we can't really 100% trust our users to do the right thing. But with this security guardrails and say, if this has this source code or these keywords in your organization, then you cannot even query those keywords with GitHub Copilot or whatever AI models you are using. So the ability to be able to kind of put guardrails in place and to prevent data leakage in future is one key thing that I also look out for when we acquire or whenever I want to acquire like a new AI models in our organization. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think Helen has covered a lot. If I just speak from a audit perspective, like why would I be worried when I'm engaging someone and just know that the environment may not be great, would be things around disclosure of AI or even an inventory, right? So that's why I went to the point of what is AI at the start. So speaking to organizations, and organizations have not started maintaining an inventory. So in traditional like security, you have like an asset inventory where you maintain those things. Now with the use of AI and all of those things, we need to be maintaining that as well. One other common one as well is where they use black box as an excuse for everything, right? So because explainability, and Kachi, you talked about this a little, explainability is a big challenge with LLMs in particular. And I remember when I was writing my CISSP and preparing for it, one of the biggest things I took away from it was obscurity is dangerous. So if you're trying to be secure by hiding things, then it's worrisome. And so there should be some form of documentation. It could be high level documentation of how the model works, right? There should be some documentation just to show that there's governance around it. Closely links to what Helen said around testing. I would also be checking that they are updating the test sets, the data that they use to test it, right? And this is one way I've seen in the client environment, right? Because these models are trained to please, right? So every time you say it is right, it takes that as feedback. If you keep using the same data sets, it would always pass, right? And in an environment like a bank, for instance, where you have to make key decisions like maybe credit scoring, which would impact whether or not you give a loan, changing that data set to ensure it is fresh is really important. So these are like three key things I'll be watching out for. We can talk about contracts and disclosures and all of those things, but those are the ones I'll be thinking about.
Okay, thank you very much, the two of you. Actually, very, very good comment. I want to stick to something that Helen said. But before I go to that, we've talked about third parties, fourth parties, expertise in quote, is a major concern. I know there are some tools on the market, to be fair, that allow you to see if you have a third party, this is maybe some of the platforms they are using based on their digital footprint. So there's technologies in the market that is adding to your supply chain, but there are technologies in the market that allow you to see these are our third parties and these are those third parties, these are their third parties in terms of continuous monitoring. So, but we've been talking about confirming information, claims and quote from our vendors or potential vendors. How about validation of those security claims? Now, you could ask company A that you want to take as a vendor, how do you train your model? They can give you any answer. I could ask them, what's up with your security program? They can give you any answer. Or you can even ask them, do you have cyber insurance? And they can give you any answer. So I can answer you anything I want. So how would you, as a security manager, and how would you as an auditor, I mean, professional skepticism, Emmanuel,
Yep.
how would you validate the claims, or how would our listeners validate the claims of vendors they are dealing with, AI vendors, for example, that are claiming to have XYZ?
Yeah, so if I would just start with that, I think it's all starts from like a contracts perspective, right? So one of the key things I would encourage people, if you can, if you have the leverage, introduce a rights to audit clause in your contract. And I say leverage because, I mean, depending on the size of the company, not all contracts are modifiable. So if you can introduce that clause so that you have like you can go into that environment and do some testing themselves. And I think when we talk about this topic of like explainability, what kind of tests can you do? I think you can think about it like two ways, right? There are two types of, for the purpose of this conversation, two types of AIs. They are the ones where the data is interpretable or the model is interpretable. So for instance, it's a machine learning logic, it's a machine learning system where they do some testing, and what is there. So if I step back and look at the process controls for those, what is their criteria for accepting a test as successful, right? You can go there and request for those evidence, and if it was even approved. And where this changes slightly from traditional audits, you probably are looking at or was the change approved, and if that was good. But in this era of AI, you want to know under what criteria did they approve it. So for instance, they say, okay, our benchmark for accuracy is 90% or 99%. On paper, 99% sounds great. But if we apply our knowledge of like network uptime availability, right, where 99% may be great for a manufacturing company, but 99% is very terrible for a bank that has a lot of transactions, right? So when the things like accuracy becomes important, they also have like a term like precision as well, or recall, looking at those terms that they set as approval limits for anything to go into production becomes really important at the moment. And all of these are also still surrounded by the general controls we have around things should be approved, things should be tested. So if you have the rights to audit, you can go into the environment, pull list of changes that have happened, ask for an evidence of approval for it, ask for evidence of testing of those things. If it's an environment that has those, you would say it. And also things around like um their model governance, for instance. They should have, we expect organizations to have like a model card where they review the outputs of the model. They also look at the parameters in the model as well, the things that could be tweaked in the model. So I would be checking for those things. So I think from an audit perspective, I would just summarize from an audit perspective, I would one be looking at the process that they have in place that governs their environment in general, change management, access management, but more targeted towards AI specific parameters. Those are the things that I will be checking. Of course, we have external validation, but like external validation, like a SOC report and those kind of things where people have done. But like I said, the environment is moving so fast. I would be a bit hesitant to just rely on an external auditor validation when it comes to AI.
Thanks, Emmanuel. Kelly?
Yeah, I think I support what Emmanuel said, especially the part of the right to audit. And I think it's really important because I think it's a tricky one, to be very honest. And sometimes we just trust by saying, I mean, when I give like a list of third-party assessment questionnaire, I mean, you can just say yes or no, yes or no. But I think one other thing that I know that our vendors do for us is that once we fill those long, boring questionnaires, they go back and it's just beyond a yes or no answer. You kind of buttress your point, I mean, your yes or no with points and reasons and possibly like evidences, like screenshots of saying we do this, we have this. And if they have any clarification, so if you're about to acquire or use any of the AI models or any of this AI company, I'm sure you would do your due diligence and ask them all those questions. And I think it's now kind of come down to us to not be lazy and look at every responses that they've provided, just that they will do for you if you want to do business with them. And if you have any clarifications or anything at all, then you can set up a call with them and then, mostly show me, like share your screen and show me this. I know that, yes, I mean, when we so it's just like beyond the assurances of saying, oh, we have SOC 2, we have ISO, we have NIST and compliance reports, which is good, which shows that we kind of trust the external auditors that they've done their job, right? But sometimes you could take any of the controls from SOC 2 or ISO. Say, for instance, the SOC 2 one, which has the security part audit control, like, or say ISO 27001 that has the application security requirements or data security requirements. You can just test them in any of these control, like randomly choose any of the Nexus control and say, can you demonstrate that you have this or this, right? And that's one thing that it's just beyond the assurances, but like requesting for evidence. And another thing would be, can you get the results of the internal and external pen test reports? And the pen test report is not just showing that they have one critical or one low or one medium. It's also looking at what are the tests. I mean, what are this model tested against? I mean, is there like anything around like an adversary testing against the AI models? You need to understand that. I mean, based on the pen test report, I'm sure the pen tester would have written those things like, okay, we've done DDoS test, we've done this and that around the model. And then one thing I will also think of is data retention. I know that we can't say they can, I mean, really keep our data or where did they store the data. I think you need to understand how long would this data be kept. I mean, wherever location or wherever storage that they are using, you need to also understand that. And are these data encrypted? The encryption policy, which is a part of the technical controls that you need to also understand. And it's not just beyond a yes or no answer. You might want to just see what kind of encryption mode that they use and just look at evidences from all these things. And I think those are the kind of things I really want to mention around validating the security claim that I've done, and I would have said maybe you should sort of understand their governances around AI. How do they how is the AI model being governed? You might also want to understand that. And when I talk about AI governance, you might want to understand this AI model, like I always said, is it open source? Is it being built for them? Is it licensed or proprietary? You need to understand that. And one key thing will also be when I have my data on your platform, is my data being anonymized? How is my data being protected? And you need to also test this. It's not just a yes or no answer. Can you show me an instance or an example where your client data has been anonymized, or can you show me the or the model you used, or the encryption method, or whatever method that you use, the technical method that shows that any customer data has been anonymized in your organization? You might want to do that as well. And the right to audit one is, yeah, I mean, if you're able to do that, that means that you can also possibly test their system. But I know that is like a tricky one. If I want to do business with Microsoft today, I can't say I want to test their Microsoft Copilot or probably GitHub Copilot. But maybe if the organization is a very big one and you handle something really critical like government or public sector, something very important, you might want to also test their system or require like a third party evaluation on the AI models, like a trusted third party evaluation. Yeah, I think that's what I would.
Thank you, Helen. Thank you,
Yeah.
Helen, and thank you, Manuel, as well.
Yeah, sorry, Kasia. I was just going to add that I feel like I'll be remiss if I don't say this as an auditor, is inquiry is never enough in anything. So you inquire and you inspect, right? Inspect evidence. Really important. And sometimes it may just be you even getting access to your through their own environment, or even if it's something that you have access to, just even testing something like a simple prompt, right? They have said our information does not store your data. Good. Put a sample data and then ask the information. So it's just that's something simple that you can just try if you left. Cool.
Yeah, and I think seriously, you don't have to be an AI expert to be able to do this. I mean, Yeah, because sometimes we might be looking at, oh, I'm not an AI expert. Then how do I, as an information risk manager or as an auditor or whatever your role is being called in the organization, how do I do this when I'm not an AI expert? We don't need to be an AI expert. You don't need to understand how they write the code, right? It's just asking questions, and from you asking the right questions and based on their answers, it kind of give you an insight into, the governance generally and their model generally. So don't worry if you don't understand the lines of code or whatever. I also don't understand how to write AI code, but those asking the right questions are very important. Yeah.
Actually, brilliant responses from Madeline and Helen. I mean, your last two comments essentially summarize what we're trying to say today. Um, you may not have all the leverage. You may be going up against a bigger firm than yours. And even if you're unable to put in right to audit clauses, you can still ask questions and you can test the questions you're asking. Yes, which is the most important thing. You must ask enough questions about how your data is held, where it is held, how long it will be held, in what form it will be held, and for each of those questions, you may want to find a way to test them, no matter your size or no matter how much access you can get from that potential vendor. So thank you. Very good comments. So we can invite questions at this point. Listeners here or listeners online, please ask your questions to Emmanuel, ask your questions to Helen. They are ready to take them, whatever the questions may be. We'll find a way to sort it out. Also, there is a poll that's for people that have joined us on Zoom, just simple questions that you can just more or less a pulse check for this particular session. So, still on that, Emmanuel and Helen, you have some comments on LinkedIn, some well done comments from the people listening to us live on LinkedIn. And someone is saying here that this is why we should encourage on-site cyber audits to review evidence documentations they are unable to share during the questioning session. So many of our listeners, both online, both YouTube, LinkedIn, and actually there's also a comment here on Zoom, agree with us or agree with the insights that we share. So let's go on. Please ask Emmanuel your questions. Please ask Helen your questions. Please ask me your questions. I could take them as well. We'll find some time to take them today. If you type online, we'll see the questions. So it's not a big deal. If you're on Zoom, please just use the Q&A tab. So let's go on, Emmanuel. Helen, let's talk shadow AI. Definitely, we know, or perhaps you can explain for everyone listening so that we're on the same page. They may understand. I imagine they understand what shadow IT is, but please explain. But then shadow AI is really a play on the words for shadow IT, and they are becoming very common. People using ChatGPT, like you mentioned, Helen, whether you approve it or not, people may use them. How concerned should organization be? How concerned should maybe your fellow managers be? And what steps can they take to maybe understand or to detect what is happening and even manage shadow AI usage effectively? Question for two of you.
Yeah, I think I would address that, but I just quickly want to also address this question from KK. Yeah, around ChatGPT calling out your name. I think KK, if you use ChatGPT, yes, by default, they actually store your data. But I think what you can do is you need to go to your settings and improve the model for everyone. So I think probably for on your own ChatGPT platform that you use, you have not explicitly say that ChatGPT or whichever AI model should not use your data for model training. So that is very important. Yeah. And so going back to Kachi question around shadow AI, I think it's tricky and really it's still around what we normally say in when it comes to social engineering, phishing, training, and the likes that there is no patch to human psychology, stupidity, trust, whatever, we can't patch it, right? In as much as, say, for instance, for phishing or social engineering, we have like security controls in place, to ensure that this and these are not, to ensure that we don't fall of cyber incidents, but at the same time, we cannot fully control that, right? And so it's the same thing with shadow AI. And one key thing is, I would say for managers of organization, don't even say, oh, you cannot use an AI model in our organization. I think we can't stop employees or users from that. And like I said, I could as well just use my external laptop or my phone to quickly, type in. And as long as I'm a fast typer, and like, so I can type really fast, I can just quickly do that, right? That's one key thing I would say. What we can do as an organization is, for your security team or your risk management team or leadership, you can sit down and say, okay, let us approve a particular AI model. So it could be Claude AI or ChatGPT or the Google AI model or Facebook one, Meta one, whichever one, and say, okay, for our organization, for every users, we want every users to use ChatGPT, right? And I will give you an instance. I will have like an AI policy saying you can use ChatGPT, which is approved, and then we can actually block or blacklist, deny list. So that I should not use the word blacklist. You can deny every other AI models and say explicitly allow ChatGPT model, right? And if for startup that if you cannot maybe buy the premium version for your users, that's fine. However, you have like an AI policy in place that they've read. And an example will be this on the question that KK asked on live chat around, oh, but how does ChatGPT or Google understands my name and the likes? And then you can kind of give them like a step-by-step guideline on to, okay, because we're using the free version and not the premium version, and we can't really control how you have to go to settings and disable, just whatever you want to disable, based on your policies or your controls in your organization. And the fact that technically we've only allowed ChatGPT and we've denied every other model, one. And then in terms of policies or controls, we have like an AI policies in place. And then we've also kind of sent it to every employees and they've read this and they've acknowledged that they've understood and read that, right? Which shows us in a way we've kind of reduced the risk by say 50, 60%. But that does not mean that there are no risk left risk around are they even bypassing the AI governance even after they've read it, right? Without a proper formal onboarding of the tool. Like, despite the fact I say, okay, we could only use ChatGPT and we cannot use other models, I still have other models on my laptop or on my phone that I use. Those are the kind of hidden risks and concerns that we've not addressed. And probably in future, we'll start seeing solutions around that. And this hidden risk could also lead to unintentional data risks, regulatory compliance issue. Sincerely, I think it's a tricky thing, but one thing I would say to managers, to um, stakeholders is don't even say, don't restrict the use of AI completely in the organization. At least allow one to let them acknowledge this, have the technical security controls in place. At the same time, people acknowledge the policy and then remind them of this policy from time to time. During your security awareness training, do you do training around AI? Are they even are your employees do they even understand the risk associated with using AI? If they do, nobody wants to fall victim, right? And I think that would help reduce the risk gradually. And yeah, you have to add that to data leakage risk will be like a thing, and you have to review the risks from time to time and see if it's something within your appetite that you can accept, or it's still like you need to add some additional controls in place to ensure that the risk is at acceptable level. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Manu.
Yeah, so I think Helen covered a lot of it. I think the user is important. there's a bit of user education that is to be done. But I think from a security perspective, we also need to be able to help the user. So we know the user is the weakest link, but how do we help the user? So i.e. things like DLP, like that you alluded to, Helen, earlier, where I think before we go into maybe DLP, before I talk about DLP, just general data classification becomes really important, right? Like, how do you enforce data classification and what can be uploaded where? I think that is really important. And then just thinking from an audit perspective is, what logs are you monitoring, right? Are you monitoring connections with particular domains and calling people out, right? So if anybody's trying to access maybe I don't know, ChatGPT, that you have blocked, and you have blocked it, which is good, but that's indicative of a behavior. So you maybe want to reach out to that person if it's a lot of things and just find out and maybe help the person. Because I think, like Helen said, it's not about banning stuff. Sometimes it's just directing people and working with them to get them. So that's what I would be thinking about from a shadow AI
Yeah.
perspective.
Okay, thank you very much. So let's, as we round off in 10, 15 minutes, let's take some questions that we have. Some questions have come in mostly on LinkedIn, interestingly. So please still ask Emmanuel and Helen your questions if you have more. So we'll try to take a few of them right now. Helen, I'll take you back to the question I was asked at the start of the call. When you were talking about zero trust, someone had asked how they can integrate zero trust when they have AI platforms, so for around AI platforms. So if you can just quickly talk through this for them.
So an example would be, I think I won't give you like a straight answer, I would just give like a scenario. A scenario would be in our organization, or in an organization you want to adopt the use of ChatGPT. I know we talk about ChatGPT a lot and we are looking at the premium version, right? You wouldn't just take everything that ChatGPT has in terms of settings as default, right? You have to deny everything, like, okay, you can't use this keyword. I mean, deny all lists, deny all data retention. I mean, think about all the settings around data retention. How can you query ChatGPT? Can you upload a document? Can you do this? Can you do that? All the features, right? By default, deny everything and disable it. And then now go back to the drawing board of, I mean, based on your risk assessment that you've done in your organization, and say, what should we allow and what should we not allow? So, which is like deny by default is zero trust principle. We don't trust this model, and we are going to deny by default every features that it could offer us as an advantage. And then you now go back to the drawing board and say, based on our risk assessment, what do we want ChatGPT to do for us? Right? Okay, we want people to be able to type. Okay, that is fine. So let's enable the typing feature and maybe like query something, and then, but we don't want anybody to be able to upload the documents except the document is vetted through your DLP solution or whatsoever, right? And that is like zero, that is trust by then that's the zero trust principle in the instance of ChatGPT. Deny everything by default, deny all the features by default, and then explicitly allow what you think should be allowed based on your risk assessment report and based on your security policies in the organization. I think that's a simple way to answer this question.
And
Okay.
yeah, I'm sorry, Kashi, if I just add to that as well, if you think about the whole agentic AI thing and agents now having access to tools and MCP protocols, it becomes really important because you may create an agent to do a particular thing because he has access to other tools that maybe you don't want it authorized for. It can start going ahead to do more things. So, i.e., you have an agent internal that you want to only do things internally, and then suddenly it's maybe checking your payroll data and doing some things with your payroll data in maybe your customer function chat, right? So you have a chat function that just interact with customer, and that instead of, if there's no, if that zero trust thing is not implemented, you can just even have a chat bot that is built for just customer facing data. Someone can query it and then is given information about internal payroll information. So that segregation of access becomes really important for agents. I know Helen talked about the users, but I'm also saying for agents that are being built, it's also things that we should be thinking about.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much, Emmanuel. There are two other questions here that I think you both just answered. So someone had asked how to protect sensitive data from AI-related risks. I imagine Helen's response covered it. I mean, if you want to ask something, you can. Also, someone had asked how we assess and mitigate AI risks. I think we've covered those. If you don't have any other comments on them, then we can go on. There's a question here about how can we govern AI usage in the organization. Helen, you had started talking about this, so maybe you can just in 1 minute just touch on it again. I know that day 3 of this webinar, just to speak to the person that dropped the question, is on AI security governance. So we have 3 CISOs that will discuss that, but maybe Helen, you can start that conversation.
So how can you govern AI in an organization? And I'll be talking from the perspective of a startup company or a startup firm that don't even have the capacity in terms of finances to start looking for someone who's an AI expert in quotes, right? And I believe that everyone, as long as you're in IT or security, in a way, somehow you are an AI expert, maybe in your own little way, depending on how it applies to what you do. And it starts by having like a community, people who are interested in AI, it could be born out of interest, say someone in finances. Oh, I just want to learn more about AI. Someone in risk management is I want to learn more about AI. So like you could have like a pool of, if you're interested in contributing to AI governance in our organization, you don't have to be an expert, you don't have to understand it, but we just want to start from beginning, right? And then once you kind of form a committee, thank God there are frameworks, the NIST AI RMF framework, the ISO for 2001 framework, and for an information security professional, say for instance me, who has experience with other frameworks like the NIST cyber framework itself or 2001 framework, it's easier for you. I mean, you could actually read the NIST AI framework and the 2001 framework to understand how this could be adopted in your organization, right? And based on the security controls that has been set out in any of this framework, I would say just take one framework that you're comfortable with. You don't have to use all the frameworks now. And understand what the security controls are. And since you have like a committee of people who are not just IT, people from finance, people from legal departments that are interested in AI, you could just kind of walk them through what the framework is saying. This is the controls that we need to put in place, this and this and that. And they have like a broad understanding. And from there, you ask them, how can this be applied to your departments? Because AI is not just security. We're not looking at security or the dev team alone or the IT team alone. We're looking at AI from every business angle. And because you have a representative from each of these businesses or departments, they are the experts in legal, they are the experts in finance, they are the experts in compliance. Based on the training you've done or your own research as an information security manager or head of security or head of compliance, they could easily say this is how this could be applied or this can be applied in our department. And that way it can be cascaded down to their team members because you have like a rep from each of the department that understand the governance around it. I think that's like one key way that that you could actually start is rather than having everything on your head or within your security and compliance team alone. And then based on feedbacks from representative, you could now use that one to develop like an AI policy because you now have like, okay, generalized policy that can be applicable to every department or every business within your organization. And that is how, if you're thinking of, oh, how can I have like an AI policy rather than just using templates, right? And that way you're able to kind of adopt like a single document or maybe 4-page or 5-page documents that talks to everyone in an organization. And that's, I mean, that's like a starting point, reading the policy, acknowledging the policy, and the place of risk assessment is also there. And risk assessment is not looking at IT alone. Like you're looking at risk assessment based on the responses that you've and the feedback that you've gotten from business units or people who are interested in this, and you've kind of have like a risk assessment, you've done your analysis, and based on the risk report, on the result of the risk, you could also feed that one back into your AI policies. And before you know, you have like a governance in place, and it's always like a continuous process. It's never a one-time assessment. It's because the technology advances every now and then, and you could set up like a committee, like meet every month or every two months, depending on your risk analysis report. And before you know, you have a governance in place. Spend the time you have like an AI expert. But I believe that even having like follow-up meeting every month, and you don't want to come to the meeting not saying anything or not contributing, you have AI experts, people that can be like a governance, governing AI in your organization across business units. Yeah.
I think what I liked about solution you get, what you've talked about, Helen, is how you did not start from policy. Really like that, because sometimes we just start from a generic policy and then try to force everybody. But understanding your business process and then generating a policy out of that is tailored to your own environment. I think it's a really good flow. If I just maybe catch, if you allow me, just talk from an audit perspective, just controls you should be thinking about. I think just the way we talk about including security, like secure by design or security in the entire SDLC cycle, you still also want to do it. So from like a design perspective, you also want to be reviewing the use cases as well that you are trying to develop, the data that you will be putting in as well. You want to be reviewing that. What is the data source we are going to be using for training? How are we even going to test this at the end of the day? So you want to have that that use case review. And then in the building phase, I think one thing I'll probably not mention is around bias as well. You want to just check for bias. We know that LLMs, there are some LLMs that have scraped information from the internet. We don't know how does that scraping happened. So there's bias that may come into play. So you want to be checking for that. And I'm saying that especially because like in the finance space where I tend to operate, and you see like decisions being made using AI, decisions like giving credits made using AI, you want to be sure that that data that is being used, that model is free from bias and is fair. If not, you get sued, right? There's regulatory risk around that. You get sued. And one thing I would just also add as well, in all of these things, I think given the state of AI, we still want human in the loop, given the state, right? As much as possible, put a human in the loop somewhere, somehow. And because I'm an auditor and I am selfish, think about audits, right? As we go through this, are we leaving trail for the auditors to be able to say this thing is explainable? So that's what I'll be thinking about. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Emmanuel and Helen. We may not have time to take more questions. So I will take your closing comments, starting from Helen. So just a quick closing comment. In that closing comment, you can recommend to our listeners some quick things they can do in the next maybe 30 days to start tackling third-party risk around AI.
Oh my God, closing. Okay. I I think based on what we've discussed in the last 1 hour and some minutes, I think one key thing for me that I think it's like a take home, or I learned as I was talking as well. I'm like, okay, I think I need to apply this. I think we should treat every AI tool, right? Whether it is being developed in-house or it is free or you have the premium version, or as a vendor in your risk ecosystem. So it's just beyond saying I have Microsoft or we have a SIM solution and those are the vendors. No, I think every AI tools, you have to add them as a vendor in your risk ecosystem, like in your overall risk management system, So I think that's one thing I would say, because right now as we're talking, I'm like, okay, I think we are missing this, and yeah, I should add that to it. So yeah. So that's what I'm planning to do as a take home for myself. So I'm also echoing that. So
Okay, take them for you, take them for our listeners. That's fine. Thank you very much. Emmanuel?
I think three thoughts come to mind. One, if you've not updated your vendor questionnaire to ask about the use of AI and the models, please do update it, so that you can at least get a sense of where they are using it, and that's important. Two, get an inventory of the AI assets that your organization is using. It's really important, and AI is beyond. It's not just Chat GPT or LLMs, right? It is also everything in that space. These are the takeaways that I think you should be thinking about. And I really liked what Helen said about you don't have to be an expert to do these reviews sometimes.
Okay. Thank you very much, Helen. Thank you, Emmanuel. It has been an excellent conversation, actually, because you bring two unique views to it. Information security manager, Helen's an information security manager at Polynet. Yes, a fintech, and Emmanuel, digital audit manager. So you are the intersection between audit and cybersecurity in PwC UK. So brilliant conversation, brilliant thoughts from the two of you. Thank you very much. For day two, today we've been looking at AI and the expanding supply chain risks that it brings in. So it's been lovely to have you here. Once again, this is, as we close, this is brought to you by cybercatch.com. We've had day one already of the webinar, and we do all of this. We focused on building security teams via training. So provide different trainings, executive staff security training, cybersecurity readiness as well. You can follow us on LinkedIn via that QR code. Yes. And also you can join the Cybercatch podcast on Spotify and YouTube. Now, there is one more day left. On the first day of this webinar series, we discussed vibe coding. Today we've had Helen and Emmanuel talk to us about the supply chain risks. And for the final day, we will have three CISOs, interestingly, to discuss AI security governance, which Helen, you've summarized very well. But we'll have three CISOs join us to discuss AI security governance. So please make sure you join. The QR code there will take you to the registration link, and you can join our conversation next week, same time, to continue the conversation. Thank you very much, everyone, for listening. Thank you, Emmanuel. Thank you, Helen. It's been brilliant. It's been excellent having you join us on the conversation. Thank you to our listeners as well. Please enjoy the rest of